Hello and welcome to another update. In this one I'll be covering the whole front line again, but as usual there's not a lot of updates on the flanks, so we'll be focusing on Bakhmut. The usual fighting continues on the whole Crimea front, all the way from Verkhnekamiensky to Makiivka in the north and everywhere along the way. Then we also see fighting all the way from Avdiivka to Uledar, where here in Avdiivka there's been some significant changes to the front line, and that is that the Ukrainians have managed to take control over the railway that goes in and out of Avdiivka. However, the Russian forces still have positions very close to it, so they cannot use it properly, but they still have regained these positions west of the village, which allows them to use this road again, although not for trains, for other vehicles and so on, that will be able to use this area, as well as a proper defensive line for the Stepovo-Berdishi area. A quick message to everyone: as you can see, the stats haven't changed that much since the last time. We see here that the subscribers who are watching my video only account for about 36% of my viewership, while 64% are not subscribed. So make sure that if you're not subscribed to leave a like and hit that subscribe button so that you get notified every time I upload a video, and it helps me out a lot. I want to hit 100,000 subscribers and I'm currently at 95,337. So let's get this last 4,663 subscribers so that I can hit the milestone. If you look at the past 2 weeks, I have barely grown compared to the prior 2 weeks. So let's make sure to pick up the slack and hit that 100,000 subscribers. Thank you everyone for the support. As for the Bakhmut front, on the flanks, fighting continues in the usual areas. However, here again there's been a significant update, and that is that the Ukrainian forces have managed to not completely recapture the parts that the Russian forces managed to capture over the past few days, but return into a gray zone, where the most trenches here to the south and in the road have been returned to a contested state rather than a Russian control state. So essentially there's been a lot of videos over the past 24 hours where Ukrainian forces have used a lot of drones especially, but also gone in, attacked with armored vehicles, as well as stormed with their own troops, pushing and trench warfare, in the sense that instead of trench-to-trench fighting, where they shoot at each other from two different trenches, most of the actual fighting is when there's a trench going through and one side is on one side of the trench and the other side is on the other side of the trench, and then they advance back and forth, fighting each other in these locations. So currently the Ukrainian forces are sending troops to the southern parts of the trenches, and Russian forces are sending troops to the northern parts of the trenches, and then they are fighting each other from each position as they try to push at each other and take full control over the trenches. As we can see through the satellite imagery here, the Russian forces are actually with their own roads here to the north that leads to the road, and then the Ukrainian forces actually have their own road, which is the road itself, the 0506 road, that leads to this position. So both sides actually have roads that lead to this area. So although there's a lot of heavy rain, as long as they keep to these roads, they are able to transfer between them. The Russian forces are trying to prevent any transfer through these roads by using FAB bombs, which are the heaviest bombs the Russian forces have. Currently they're using 500 kilogram yields. However, in the future they're planning on much higher yields. But as of now, 500 kilograms is enough to blow a huge hole on the road, and they use them consistently. They're using about 10 to 20 a day right now, only in Bakhmut, and like in the road between Bakhmut and Chasiv Yar, so the Bakhmut area itself. But they try to completely dismantle any Ukrainian chance of using this road. And the Ukrainians are just heavily shelling this road, but that is also more effective, as the road here is paved dirt roads, while this is paved concrete roads. So although the Russian forces are using heavier weaponry, the Ukrainian forces have less resistance to go through. So essentially, what is my conclusion? My conclusion is that this road is mostly unusable. However, the Ukrainians have enough use of this road to actually reach the front line, which is this part here, and contest the road itself. So rather than reinforcements and support and ammunition and so on reaching the city, they reach this part. So the goal of cutting off this road is essentially done, as the Russian forces have prevented supplies to go to Bakhmut through this road. However, the Ukrainian forces are still contesting it, which means it could still go either way as the situation is right now. Then we move on to the Khromove area itself, where the Russian forces are trying to attack from 3 directions. They're trying to move southwestwards towards Khromove to cut off the Ukrainian flank from the east. And at the same time, they're going through the forest lines here to the north, where they're trying to reach the village. And to the east, in the direction of Bakhmut itself, they're fighting by the Olympic School, which is this area right here. So the Russian forces are trying to gain control over this area, which is called the Olympic School area, as they try to gain control over the northwesternmost parts of the city, as they wanted to close in and cut off the link between Khromove and Bakhmut itself, the last Ukrainian positions in Bakhmut. So there is heavily fighting by this area, as well as the Tulbohina Street. There's been reports by Remy that the Russian forces continuously advance within this street. However, there's no indication as to where exactly those advances have happened. At the same time, he also reports that in this garage area here to the northeast of the heavily fortified residential area, the Russian forces are continuously attacking it from 3 separate directions, from the west, from the north, and from the east, as the Russian forces continue their attempts at taking full control over the fortified areas here in Bakhmut. Which leads us to the central area, where the Russian forces have managed to advance significantly, reaching the Polevaya Street, just as Remy reported yesterday. And then we also see some advances here next to the train station. So in these areas, we see that the Russian forces are pushing towards the heavily fortified residential areas. So as I've been saying in previous videos, the current Russian objective is to take control over all of these lesser fortified residential areas to try and cut off the heavily fortified areas. And at the same time, they want to reach these fortified areas to create some sort of boundary next to them, as they try to cut them off rather than go through them. So their current goal is to push southwestwards and northwestwards, at the same time westwards from the railway line, to reach the borders of this heavily fortified area, and then focus on Khromove, Ivanivske and Bohdanivka to cut off all supplies going in and out of the city, and leaving the only area in Ukrainian hands to be the heavily fortified areas, but they will be completely cut off from supplies in and out of the city. Then we see fighting continues here in the southwest, and according to Remy's latest update, the Russian forces have managed to reach this industrial college from the side. So most likely they are fighting by these container areas here to the southeast, as that is the area they're closest to, or they could have advanced northwards and then westwards towards the edges of it from the east. But essentially the fighting has reached the industrial college, and that is a significant part, as it is a heavily fortified Ukrainian position. They will have one of 2 options. They will have to go around it, try to do the same as they're doing to the rest of the fortified areas, or they'll want to actually take control of it, similar to what happened in Soledar, but in a much smaller scale. So Soledar is essentially the heavily fortified flank of Bakhmut. As soon as the Russian forces managed to capture Soledar, they managed to gain a huge influx of soldiers in these northern parts, which essentially allowed the Russian forces to start the offensive in Bakhmut. While at the same time, this is much smaller in scale. It's still a heavily fortified flank of the current heavily fortified positions of the Ukrainian forces, which means that if the Russian forces want to gain control over this road, cut off the supplies from the south, they would need to gain control over this, as well as these fortified areas to the southwest. If the Russian forces manage to capture these 2 areas, the supplies from the southwest will be completely cut off, although there's a connection between Ivanivske and Khromove here from the south. If the Russian forces manage to advance to the western area, they'll be able to cut off the supplies from this direction as well. So essentially, and in conclusion to the situation in Bakhmut, the current situation is that the Russian forces are moving on to reach the heavily fortified areas of the Ukrainian positions in Bakhmut, while at the same time they're trying to push to take control over the supply lines to the southwest, to the northwest, and to the direct west of the city, as they want to completely encircle the city. Now that only the heavily fortified areas are left, instead of having to fight the Ukrainians head on, they want to encircle the city, which will cause much less casualties to the Russian forces within the city. And that is all for this update. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.